I'm really pleased to be joined on Not the Andrew Marr Show by Abu Bakr, who is part of the Muslim vote, which we've heard a lot about, but I wanted to find out, you know, a bit more. How are you doing, Abu Bakr?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, look, it's good. It's great to hear about what you're doing. I mean, I've seen your website. It's very good to read. If anyone wants to look at it, it's quite easy to get around, navigate. Very clear what your aims are and your objectives. But you know, just so before people do look at the website, can you tell us what was it that led you to think about setting up the Muslim vote? Why you and others decided to do this?
Yeah,
Was there a
sure.
defining moment? Was there a particular moment when you thought of it?
Yeah, sure. So for a long time, me and others around the Muslim community around the UK from different backgrounds have thought politicians have taken our votes for granted. And politicians work for us, they represent us. And I think the vote in Gaza, the ceasefire vote, SNP amendment in November, was a defining moment. It was a moment that proved that despite the wishes of the vast majority of this country, the latest polling suggests around 70% of the country support a ceasefire. Despite this, our MPs, overwhelmingly, 81% of them failed to vote for a ceasefire. And it proved to us that MPs and those who are meant to represent us do not actually represent us in the Houses of Parliament where and do their jobs. Right. So we decided as we were going to set up a movement and our vote should have a value. So we're going to stand together and try and unite Muslim communities across the country, unite our voice and show that there is a that if MPs, politicians, PBCs want the vote of Muslims in their constituency, then they have to earn it by representing their values and their morals.
Looking at the website, you have a lot of groups that support you. You've got a whole section, Our Supporters, and it's quite an impressive list. I mean, is that growing all the time?
Yeah, we're continuing to grow. We're having conversations with people not just on the list, a cross section of groups all across the country. We're consistently engaged in dialogue and working to really ensure that this movement represents Muslims across the country and that everyone managed to have a voice. And at a local level, of course, we're encouraging Muslim communities to engage with people all across the spectrum in their own local communities.
And you know, on the show, we've on not the Andrew Marr Show, we've been highlighting like Andrew Feinstein in Holborn and St Pancras, Emma Dent Code in Kensington, the Workers' Party's campaign at George Galloway, obviously. What's your communications like with those other groups? I mean, I know Tusk as well have about 100. I think they're planning to try and get 100 candidates. Have you got any communications with those groups and those candidates?
Like I said, yeah, we've been communicating with independents across the country. And I think what is really key as we come up to the next election is that each community is able to unite behind one candidate. One candidate, whether they be Muslim, non-Muslim, but one candidate who represents the values of that community that is, has an ethical foreign policy, wants to invest in our NHS, has a desire to tackle the poverty rates in this country and invest in our communities. And these are the kind of candidates we want. So across the country, our aim really is to have one um, independent in each seat who we can unite behind, rally behind, and ensure that there is a block vote against, the main two parties who have for too long been too comfortable in power. And I feel like we owe them our vote. That without them putting any effort, without them attempting to represent us. And I think it's now time that we send a clear message to those MPs who fail to vote for a ceasefire that if you do not represent us, then you won't get our votes.
So you're not a political party as much as just supporting those independent candidates, right? So it's not like you're setting up a political party. That's
This
not
is
the
not
aim.
this is not a political party. This is
Right.
a movement where we are, for too long we've been stuck in a cycle of party-based politics or personality-based politics. We really want to move to a position where it's principle-based politics. So in any given constituency, whoever the best candidate is, whichever party they represent, if they're an independent, Green, Lib Dem, in some circumstances they might be even the Labour or Conservative party. It's up to the local community to decide, right? But really, what we want, and I understand it will, very, very rarely be a Conservative MP, but really, it's not about the message I'm trying to get is not about it's not about the party. It's about the policies that those MPs promise to represent. And if they represent us on foreign policy, on domestic policy, on NHS, on investment in education and skills, then we will, as a community, look to back them, support them, and give us them our votes.
And talking about just Rochdale result. I mean, George Galloway winning in Rochdale. What's your view on that? I mean, some people have said it was the Muslim vote that won that for George Galloway, but also if you look at the figures, it can't have been just a Muslim vote. It was an alliance of lots of Muslims, obviously, but also non-Muslims.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about that by-election result specifically is not just George Galloway who came first, but the second place was also an independent. A person, if you read their manifesto, ran an ultra local ticket. And I think there's very clear signs now that across the country there are severe levels of dissatisfaction towards the status quo, towards MPs who have become increasingly complacent in their way that they represent their constituents. And I think this is like I said, we don't want this movement to be a flash in a pan, just a 2024 movement. We want it to continue 2029, 2034, every election that we make MPs and politicians from the established parties put pressure on them to represent the views of their constituents, of their local communities, and really put people and communities at the forefront of their policies.
I we I've also noticed on the website you've got you said just before we started this interview that you're actually doing a voter registration drive. Do you think that's a big issue that we've got to look at for those who want to oppose the genocide supporting parties? I mean, there's a lot of people who are not registered who've given up. I mean, we have to show them that it's worth being part of it, don't we?
Absolutely. There is some anger in this movement, right? But I think this is really a movement of hope. And I want to get this message across to as many people as possible that we believe that there is better out there. We don't have to accept the status quo. And that's the message that we're trying to get to hundreds of thousands of Muslims across the country. That despite the failure of our politicians in November and their ongoing failure in the genocide in Gaza and across a range of issues, we can have a difference. Our vote can make an impact. We can't get disillusioned. We have to register to vote, make our voices heard, and make a real difference. It's only when the democratic process is one of the best ways we can really pressure our politicians and show our dissatisfaction with how they behaved. So I send this message out to Muslims and all those of conscience across the country, right? Register to vote and turn up and put your vote against the candidate who has matches your values and really represents those things that you hold dearest to your heart.
I mean, the result in Rochdale. I mean, within a day, Rishi Sunak's gone on a podium outside to sort of attack Galloway, but also anyone who's protesting against Gaza effectively. Doesn't that show, as you've just said, how significant the election is? I mean, we've done protests every week since October, and he's not come out on a podium. The first time he gets threatened in Parliament, he's out there. So it clearly shows that we've got to focus on the vote, as you're saying, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is a powerful tool, right? We have an election once every 5 years. I know there was a period where during Brexit where there was an election every other week, it seemed. But now we have an opportunity once every 5 years to make our voices really clearly heard to those who rule over us, right? That they work for us, that this is a democratic system, and that we will hold them to account based on the way that they have behaved in Parliament, the votes that they have given, the actions, the statements they have made, and we will turn up, and we won't just sit back and take their unacceptable behavior the way that they have behaved over the last, 5, 10, 15 years, we really will create a movement where we, the voters, are represented and our values and our interests are represented in Parliament. And like I said, this is not a one-off election movement. This is a long-term movement about changing the way our politicians, our MPs, and those who represent us behave, and make sure that they work and they understand that they are our representatives.
Finally, I mean, just to ask you about, I mean, the Islamophobia that has been coming out in the past, well, since October. It's pretty terrifying, isn't it? I mean, that that shows that there must be a voice for Muslims in Parliament that's strong, or otherwise these attacks will continue. Is that part of it as well?
I mean, a recent survey by the Islamophobia Response Unit, their most recent data suggests that there was a 300% increase in Islamophobia in recent months. It's very clear that we, as Muslims and as communities, really have to stand up against the hatred that politicians are trying to sow. They've realized that they've made a mistake and they're trying these divide and conquer tactics. It's up to us as communities to build bridges, to work together and stand up against this hate. And this is really key. And this is one of the key aims of the Muslim vote movement, to ensure that we have politicians who, instead of using decisive rhetoric, bring communities together, work together to find solutions to problems, and most importantly, in this moment, is end the ongoing murder of innocent Palestinians in Gaza every day.